Hello everyone! Today, with the full release of Darktide out now, I've got another video for you guys. Now, I've been putting a lot of time into this game, and honestly, I'm fucking addicted. I've already completed nearly all the Zealot penances and managed to rack up 3 digits worth of hours of in-game time, so I finally think I feel comfortable enough to make a proper guide for you guys. Now, I know some of you have been wanting to hear from me and my thoughts on all the new content from the pre-order beta, so I'd like to share the build that I have been absolutely dominating with on Zealot, both in dedicated teams and in quick play. Now, I'm going to talk about 3 things in this video. First is the weapons and loadout. Second is the talents, or the feats, if you will. And lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit on how to play this build, because it does have a specific way that it should be played. Now, if you watched my last video, I touched on Zealot's playstyle there, but I'm going to attempt to go into further detail here to help you guys up your skill level in this game. So, without further ado, let's just hop right into it. First up is the Tactical Axe, specifically the Mark II variant, and I will tell you why in a moment. The Tactical Axe has been my favorite weapon on Zealot so far. It used to be broken and had infinite dodges, however, Fatshark hit it with the nerf hammer, and now it is far more balanced. But that hasn't stopped me from loving the effectiveness of this weapon. It is branded as a flurry/assassin type weapon, which means that it hits very fast, and if you hit the right spot, very hard. The key to this weapon is in its mobility first and its DPS second. Of course, it will vary in efficacy based on its rolled stats, but the idea remains the same. Through sheer mechanical aptitude, close the distance between you and the enemy by taking as minimal damage as possible and using as few resources as possible. This weapon enables that playstyle excellently. With my mobility stat, this weapon has a dodge limit of 5 and a decent bonus to dodge distance. Note that in Vermintide 2, we used to call this your effective dodge count, and although it works slightly different in Darktide, the principal function is still the same. What this means is I can dodge at full effectiveness up to 5 times in a row, but subsequent dodges after the 5th will slowly degrade my dodge distance and speed to values that make dodging useless. In the case of this Tactical Axe, it doesn't become super noticeable until the 7th or 8th dodge, then around 10 or so it becomes completely useless. What this means is that every 5 to 7 dodges in a row, I need to spend around 2 seconds doing something else other than dodging to reset the cooldown. An important note is that in the current release build of the game, sliding will actually delay your dodge reset cooldown, so you should instead just walk or sprint to reset it. Most of these aspects of dodging are boosted by the mobility stat, and while we are on the topic of stats, now is a good time to mention that every one of the variable stats on this weapon is incredibly useful. To give you a quick rundown, damage does exactly what you'd expect. It affects all the damage that you do in all scenarios. Mobility affects the effectiveness of your dodge and your sprint. Critical bonus affects both your crit chance and your crit damage. Penetration affects how much damage you do against armored targets, and finesse increases your attack speed and somewhat increases headshot and crit damage. Fortunately, Fatshark made all of this information very easily accessible on the release build, and all you have to do is go and inspect a weapon and you can see exactly what every one of these stats does. And they even added this awesome chart that shows the exact damage values you will do to different armor levels, whether you body shot, headshot, crit, or both. This is amazing, and is hands down the most detailed resource I have ever seen Fatshark put into one of their games. We used to have to mod this kind of stuff in, now it's just here for everyone to see, and I think they did a good job. Now let's talk about why specifically the Mark II variant is my favorite, and for that we need to understand swing patterns. So on the Mark II Tactical, the light attack chain is kind of this 3-hit flurry combo that is marked as an assassin-style attack. This seems to be aimed at killing a single target and is, in my opinion, basically worthless on the Mark II. The attack comes out pretty quickly, but their damage is quite poor, and the swing pattern makes it harder to hit the thing you're aiming at with a light attack than with a heavy attack. Plus, it also has this kind of awkward cooldown after the 3-hit combo that doesn't really flow well into any action. It's actually outshined by the heavy attack in almost every way. So understanding that the light attack kinda sucks, we want to make sure that the heavy attack can perform in every scenario it needs to, and spoiler alert, with the right build, it certainly can. The Mark II's heavy chain is a combo left-right diagonal overhead swing, making it very predictable to use and will scale well with cleave, since the attacks come out mostly horizontally. It is marked as a strike down style attack, meaning it does high damage to a single to few targets. Normally, the heavy attack on a weapon is kind of dangerous to pull off because it has this wind-up animation where you are vulnerable and not staggering things. But the tactical axe is quite quick, and if you are using your mobility properly, you can circumvent that window of vulnerability by dodging, making it actually quite safe. It also does a fair amount of damage, especially if you are aiming for the head or unarmored parts of their body. Its DPS against carapace armor is quite poor, so crushers can be slow to kill, but the heavy attack scales very well with crits, so you can use your ults if you need to do high damage quickly. If you do that, and remember to aim for the head, then crushers will die without too much trouble. Both the other tactical axe variants have full overhead or underhand swings in their heavy chain, which makes them less versatile in my opinion. However, they are still certainly playable, and probably quite good in effective hands. But a little disclaimer here, I have not extensively used every variant of every weapon available to the Zealot, so there might be some hidden gems, so to speak, that I simply have not given a chance to really shine. My hope is that this extensive breakdown of why I like the tactical axe and what to look for in a weapon can give you guys some insight on how to tweak this build for yourself or craft a new one entirely if you so wish. The amazing thing about the Zealot is that he is quite flexible. Now, the only major downside to the tactical axe is that it doesn't cleave through very many enemies. Fortunately for us, we can fix that. Sort of. The one trait that I would highly recommend is Brutal Momentum, which basically gives you infinite cleave for 3.5 seconds on a weak spot kill. Now understand that you will not be dealing full damage to every single target, but it seems that you can certainly stagger most things standing in front of you, and with enough swings, you will kill everything. This trait makes it very safe against hordes and fairly safe against high-tier melee infantry. So long as you remember to aim for their heads, this buff can be kept up pretty consistently. As for the properties, I'm not sure exactly what is optimal, but you want to be focusing on boosting your DPS against targets that are dangerous. Specifically, elites and specials ideally. Okay, so that was the tactical axe. It took a while to cover everything that I wanted to, but since it is your primary tool in most scenarios, it is very important to understand how it works. Next up, for the ranged weapon, I typically run the Purgation Flamer because my mobility allows me to deal with most ranged threats, and the Flamer helps to keep my team alive by providing mass pressure relief in a short time window. The only things this weapon cannot melt are bulwarks if they have their shield facing you, and crushers who take very little damage from flamers. When rolling stats for this weapon, you want to prioritize burn and ammo. Cloud radius is nice too. Burn is your primary source of damage, contrary to what you might think. The damage stat on flamers only affects the damage done by the initial flame, not the DOT application. That is instead controlled by burn, and is where most of the DPS actually comes from. Mobility is nice, but not necessary, because you have your tactical axe for mobility if you need it. When it comes to actually using this weapon, you want to make sure you have some space, because it does take a few seconds from switching to it before you can actually provide value. Once again, the standard left click is basically worthless, don't bother. You should always try to get the continuous flame attack off, because that is the most effective way to apply the DOT. Said DOT actually stacks non-linearly, by the way, which means the longer you flame something, the more DPS and ammo efficient you are going to be. One last note is that there is a max to how many burn stacks you can apply, and this is determined by the burn stat as well. So you want to burn for probably 5 to 7 seconds and then let off and wait for enemies to fill the gap you made, and then start burning again for maximum value. If you're really struggling to deal with elites and survive in the melee, another solid alternative is the Spearhead Boltgun. It can delete anything that breathes and helps a lot to open up those pesky bruisers and their shields. For stats, I would prioritize damage, then maybe stopping power and reload speed next. Stability is nice if you're shooting at range, but honestly, I would mostly use this to full auto crushers and bruisers at close to maybe medium range, not sit back and snipe things. So stability really isn't that important. If you want to be a bit more ammo efficient, try using your dash before you full auto, and it will take a lot less rounds to actually kill what you're shooting at, despite what the ability description may imply. As for the Curios, I typically prioritize max toughness over everything, as it is my primary tool for sustenance in combat. Some good secondary stats are stamina regen, max HP, corruption resistance if you're doing grim runs, and although I've been quite unlucky and haven't seen it, I think cooldown reduction would be very good with this build. Extra wounds is okay, but the problem is that the more aggressive you play, the less likely it is that you will be savable when you get downed, rendering it effectively useless and straight up worse than extra toughness. In my eyes, anything that requires you to go down to provide value is the wrong way to look at things with this class. The whole point of this build is to make it so you don't go down, so toughness or even extra HP is just better. Still, it's very difficult to play with absolute perfection, so if you really want to take extra wounds, I would only take 1 max. Anything else is just rewarding bad habits. Moving on to the feats. In short, I am running a 3-1-2-1-2-3 build, and in long is as follows. Tier 1, I run enemies within, enemies without, because having this level of sustenance in melee without needing to be killing things means you can afford to spend some time killing tanky targets under pressure and won't have to worry as much about toughness problems. Though honestly, I think Purify in Blood is certainly arguable here, and Faith Restored might be good too if you have a high crit rate weapon. I just haven't done enough testing to know which of these is fully optimal, but number 3 feels nice, so that's what I use. In Tier 2, I run Bloodletting, not for the bleeds, but for the crit chance, because as I stated earlier, the Tactical Axe scales very well with crits. Punishment is not great in my opinion, and although being uninterruptible is nice, I simply prefer to not get hit forehead. Retribution is okay, but we are actually not going to be spending much time at low HP, and I will explain why later. In Tier 3, I think Benediction is just objectively better than the other options in most cases. This rewards your teammates for playing aggressively with you, and helps to fuel the playstyle of not only yourself, but also your team. Holy Fervor seems too situational to be useful, and Inspiring Excoriation, it's a crazy word by the way, is okay, but it requires you to be aware of your teammates' toughness levels to be truly efficient, and we already have enough to keep track of with this build. In Tier 4, Holy Revenant is absolutely the best option and is critical to the success of this build. However, it does have quite a skill requirement to use it effectively. This is because, theoretically, if you play perfect, you can generate an infinite amount of HP using this talent. Now that is way easier said than done, obviously, but the idea is still there. Ideally, you want to be intentionally proccing this on your terms so you can most optimally generate HP for yourself. This is why I said Retribution in Tier 2 is bad, because when I get to around 20 or 30% HP, I am already looking for opportunities to intentionally trigger this to get a full or near full heal. So long as you have enemies near you when your death resist procs, it is quite easy to get 60 or more % of your HP back, and it is even easier if you're able to use your F ability to boost your DPS. It is quite the double-edged sword though, because if you get caught with your pants down by a single ranged enemy proccing your death resist and you have no one around to DPS, you will be left 1 HP from death and have to play like an absolute spineless coward for the next 90 seconds minimum, and probably the next 180 seconds before you can be fully aggressive again. And we all know that being an absolute spineless coward is not very Zealot-like, now is it? Thy Wrath Be Swift seems objectively worse in every scenario because it requires you to take damage to be effective, but replaces your only option for health regen. Lastly, Faith Restores All is a solid alternative if you find yourself struggling to get value from Holy Revenant, but it is worse overall. Moving on to tier 5, I like Rising Conviction because it seems to be the most consistent damage boosting feat in this tier. Honor the Martyr is again planning on being low HP, which is what we are actively trying to avoid, and Emperor's Executioner is decent if you're running the Boltgun, but totally unnecessary with the Flamer. Lastly, but not leastly, tier 6. I like to run Purge the Wicked, because having 2 instant sources of 50% toughness is highly valuable when you are constantly diving headfirst into super dangerous scenarios, which is exactly how I play this class. Invocation of Death could be solid if you have a high crit rate weapon, but it kind of encourages you to use your ability on cooldown for maximum efficiency rather than using it when you need it. And Fury of the Faithful is meh, and once again promoting the use of your ability for DPS, whereas it has so much more utility than that. I use it for repositioning and for replenishing my toughness way more often than just exclusively for DPS, so that's why the double charge is the way to go. And finally, at long last, we can talk about playstyle. How do you actually play this build? Well, I have a few final things that I want to talk about before we end this video. First, learn how to utilize the mobility systems in this game. Use your dodges and use slides to get into groups of enemies with minimal damage, then use your ult for sustain or a reposition to cover, or worst case, to heal from Holy Revenant if you bit off more than you can chew. Don't be afraid to use it for DPS if you're sat at 2 stacks and are feeling confident. Sometimes you might be the only person who can burst down that Crusher or Gunner. Often what I end up doing is using my dodges and slides to get into melee with full stamina. Sometimes I'm forced to ult in as an initiation because there's too much ranged pressure or my toughness breaks. Once I'm in, then I will fight and inevitably take damage. If my toughness breaks, I will try to ult immediately to preserve my HP and momentum. When I do this, I usually look for a high priority target to jump to for double value. Something like a shotgunner or normal gunner usually. And my second ult will likely do the same thing. If my death resist procs, then I am DPSing hard until I heal, then looking to disengage depending on how dangerous the situation is, as now I am actually at risk of death. Another important thing to mention is that you need to learn sound cues to survive disablers. When you go in hard, you won't always see them coming, and it is imperative that you don't get trapped by a trapper or jumped by a poxhound, because that will almost certainly wipe your team if they try to come save you and you went in deep. You need to be able to survive and operate kind of on your own. This class has a lot of tools to do that, but it is not easy by any stretch of the imagination, so work on your mechanics first and foremost. Second, be aggressive. Even if you are not confident in your abilities, you should push your limits and see exactly what you can and can't handle. This class is very forgiving with mistakes, which makes it excellent for learning the game and its systems. It's very important that you are the guy in the front, especially in quick play. There are a lot of passive players right now, and they need someone to get stuck in there and do something. Not only is it really valuable to tie up ranged enemies to get them to stop shooting you and your team, it is also a leadership position. You are a form of tank, so you can dictate the pace of the battle. If people see you jump in there head first like a dumbass, but then actually kick ass and slay everything, then the next time you go in, that Ogren that was really unsure of himself is going to feel a lot better charging in there with you as an anchor. All of a sudden, you have an Ogren buddy stuck in there with you to the death, and now survival becomes a lot easier when your team follows up with your aggression. Third, make sure you are killing priority targets. These are gunners, shotgunners, reapers, standard range troops, trappers and dogs if they get close. If they run away, you can let your range teammates handle them unless you have nothing better to do. And also, things like maulers and ragers are good things to kill too, and are hard for a lot of players to deal with. Know when to pull out the flamer to help keep pressure off your team. Use it against hordes, use it against dense groups of melee. You can use it against groups of range if the terrain is decent, but it would be better if you tie those up in melee instead. So learn to be the guy who can solve the problems, and you will become invaluable. Fourth, keep track of your resources, your dash charges, your death resist, your toughness, your stamina, your health, and your effective dodges are all things that you can manage and replenish if you play smart. If you use them all well and rotate their utilities, you will be nearly unkillable. And then lastly, and most importantly, have fun. It is a game at the end of the day, and even though I just spent the past 20 minutes telling you how to play this game, do what you think is fun first and foremost, guys. It is easy to forget about, and yet it is so important, so don't forget to enjoy yourselves while you still have the time to do so. And that's all I have for you guys. I hope this was useful for y'all, as it took me quite a long time to put this together because I wanted to make sure that the information that I am providing is actually useful and not just obvious. So please hop down there in the comments and tell me what you learned. What questions do you have, or even just to say, hi, I like your voice will at the very least make me happy, and at the very most, push this video to the algorithm. Also, last video I mentioned that I wanted to hit 1,000 subscribers to unlock the chapter feature, and I think I was at a sweet 69 subscribers. Now, although many people would say that that is the perfect number, you guys managed to bump me all the way up to 336 at the time of recording, and that is awesome. The video I made on Back 4 Blood got around 18,000 views and only got me around 70 subs. But that Darktide video got me 8 times less views and almost 4 times as many subscribers. So if that doesn't prove that the community around the Tide series is awesome, I don't know what will. It's a humble goal for someone like me, but seeing as we're already over 30% of the way there makes me think it's much more attainable than I thought. So anyways, I'll stop rambling now, keep being awesome, and I will see you gamers later. Peace!